Hello there. How's it going? My name is Jason Hand. I'm excited to be back here with you on All Around Azure, another episode. It's been fun all week. I've been kind of taking over the show while my good friend and colleague Frank Boucher is out of town on vacation. And it's been a pretty awesome set of guests that we've had all week, but I have to say I've been really looking forward to today's guest, simply because it's been forever since we've seen each other. And all the things that we've been doing and working on, we've kind of just started working on different projects, and just I don't know. It's been sad not being able to interact with some of my coworkers with just our new realities. So really excited to have on our guest. And without further ado, let's say hello to Jeramiah Dooley. Hi, Jeremiah. How are you?
Jason, how are you?
I'm doing really well now that I get to hang out with you for a little while today. What are you up to, man? Like, how's
It's
things, all things considered, I guess?
good. It's been a while, and it's you were talking about how the new reality has changed things. We spent the better part of a year kind of wandering around the world with the Ignite tour and kind of getting to do the content creation and content delivery in person for all sorts of people in all sorts of countries. And uh, it was a pretty abrupt end to all of that. There's
Uh,
uh, there's no more flying around and presenting to people.
no,
But
that's definitely not a thing for any future events, I guess you'd say. Maybe one day. There's a hope that we can get back on a plane and do
well,
those things
well,
again. But
this isn't so bad. I
no,
mean,
honestly, yeah,
there was a learning curve, right? I mean, there was a learning
creation
curve
and
in
content
just a whole
delivery in
new set of
person.
skills, a learning curve around the creation process, right? I mean, I think both of us are really good at creating presentations that land well with audiences, and this is just a different medium, a different type of skill that we needed to learn. But once I got around that corner, I really enjoy the different options that we have and the different formats that we have. The two of us talking over Skype and NDI while we broadcast on Twitch is just something that never would have entered our minds a year ago. And
Absolutely.
I'm a fan. I mean, if we never go back to the 250,000 miles a year in the air stuff, I'll be perfectly okay with that.
Yeah, I mean, I hope to still be able to go and see some things, and I hope that all of my travels are especially some of the international stuff. I had a lot of things I was looking forward to
Sure.
seeing. I had never been to Mexico City, and I don't know, just every city we went to was unique for its own reasons. All the
Absolutely.
people, the community is always different there locally. You're challenged with the local language and translations and different currencies and
Yeah.
yeah, I mean, it's fun and
And it was a
uh,
really cool group of people. Like that group of people that we
absolutely.
had that we got to go do those adventures with was pretty spectacular. So the social part of it and the adventure part of it gets replaced with something else,
Hmm.
or not replaced as the case may be. But the process by which we create the content and then share it with the communities that we care about and the communities that we advocate for, I feel like we have more tools and more flexibility now than
Hmm.
we ever have. And if that's the good that comes out of this, then I'm okay with it.
Right. Yeah, I totally agree. I mean, we had a good group of people. A lot of them were from our own cloud advocacy team,
Hmm.
and it was really our only opportunity to interact with each other face to face and learn from each other. And
Yeah.
I know you and I worked really closely on what ended up being a learning path for just kind of monitoring and operations topics.
Yeah.
And we teamed up talking about how to do a good post incident review, or otherwise known as maybe a post mortem,
Right.
and just working on that kind of thing, and like kind of dumping what I know about that area on into your lap, and helping you like absorb so much of the kind of
Yeah.
current thinking out there around what were the three traps, the human trap, or was it five traps actually? I can't remember now.
Yeah. I think it was five of them. It was talking about how humans are very bad at things, and so in order to do all of the things that we needed out of a post-incident review, whether it was doing it quickly so that so that we got good data out of it, or whether it was just making sure that we had resources dedicated to it. Like there were a whole series of things that weren't technical
Right.
as much as they were like sometimes you have to hack the people
Yep.
in order to get to the end result that makes the tech better. And that was that whole track was net new information for me that I got to learn,
Right.
and the learning it well enough that I could turn around and then present it to people and then come running back to, you and David Blank Edelman and the rest of the team with the, hey, look at all of these people that were excited by it. Like
Oh,
that
totally.
that whole process, both years that we did the Ignite tour, the abbreviated one this year and then the full one the year before, using those as learning opportunities, especially as someone who was new to Azure and new to kind of cloud environments in general coming in, was such a huge benefit to me, that I'm definitely sad to see them go.
Right.
But all things considered, you watch the news and look around the world, and things could be a lot worse than they are.
Yeah. Yeah, totally. And I can't, I remember feeling just so proud when when I started seeing the talk come together. And I remember specifically being in Paris, actually, because that was the first of the
Yeah,
stops after we did the Ignite in Orlando event.
in Orlando.
And, I was there with you and David Blank Edelman and a few others who were all part of kind of creating the content because we wanted to
Right.
test it out with the original authors, the first few stops. But I just walked away from that talk, in that auditorium going with like goosebumps, being like so
Yeah.
happy that we did that kind of content. It wasn't just showing off like how to use certain tools. Like
Yeah.
that's just not how we learn. Like
Well, we actually struggled with it. If you remember,
mm-hmm,
I mean, obviously we work for Microsoft. They wanted us to, if there are tools in Azure that help with the things that we're talking about, sharing those with the audience and giving them an idea of where they can be used is always a good thing. But I remember there were a couple of sessions in that track where we legitimately sat down and said, I don't, I don't know. I don't know what tech we can show off here.
right.
Right. I mean, I don't know. We did some really cool stuff with chatbots. We did some really cool stuff with using Azure DevOps and boards and a
Mm-hmm,
couple different things. Just as if you're starting from ground zero, here's some ways that you can maybe use the Azure resources that you already have access to.
right.
But so much of that talk was about the people and about the processes and just
Mm-hmm,
about putting a little bit of kind of kindness and perspective into what can otherwise be a really stressful time, like either
right.
planning to scale things out or having to emergency respond or
Yeah.
how to deal with disasters. Like there's so many things there that cause anxiety.
Mm-hmm,
And so an entire track that was that was focused on the well-being of the humans taking care of all of this tech
right.
was really cool, to the point where there were sessions that we didn't even know what tech to show off.
Right. Exactly.
Right. This is a
That was,
great session. This is a
that was,
great presentation.
I
Everybody
know.
loves it. I got nothing Azure to share with you on this
Yeah.
one.
Yeah. But I lean towards those. I think those are the really important things because the implementation details are going to vary. Like one of the things I say that most often when somebody asks me a question is it depends, and
Yep.
it depends on so many different things that it's difficult to even say the word best practices sometimes. I feel like I can tell you this is current thinking, this is what we all believe collectively as an industry or whatever as sort of the best way to approach solving this type of a problem in this scenario. But everybody has access to different tools and different resources, but be that people or whatever it may be. And I don't know. I just loved that track and being able to get those thoughts out there and then get the feedback that we got,
Yeah.
that people were just like, that was the best thing I saw all day. And to hear that when it wasn't, something about Kubernetes or some, hot technology, it was people really just learning, you're going to have incidents, there's going to be bad problems. We just know that's the nature of technology. And if we're going to try to take a logical thinking approach to improving this so that these types of things don't happen again in the future, we probably ought to change the way we've been, dealing with these things in the past,
Right.
because it seems like, things aren't necessarily getting better. We try to do root cause analysis and finger point on, if you shoulda, coulda, woulda. That's kind of my favorite trap to bring up, is that those anti sort of like reality scenarios where it's like,
Right.
well, yeah, I should have done that, but I couldn't, or man, I wish I would have done that. Um, you're just wasting time and energy talking about a reality that never took place, and that's not going to actually help you for the future. So it's been anyway, I digress. I could talk about this stuff forever.
Just to kind of wrap that one up, I'll tell you, it was so I feel like anytime, and you and I kind of came into both the advocacy team and came into Microsoft from an external perspective at about the same time.
Mm-hmm.
And there's the stuff that you know and that you're passionate about, and finding places where you can show that and get other people excited about it is important. And it feels good to bring that into the team and then share it. I'll tell you, it was one of the best feelings that I've had since I started at Microsoft to come off that stage in Orlando, Paris too, but more in Orlando, and know that I hadn't screwed up the content that you guys had created.
Yeah.
Like that I came off the stage and that I learned a bunch of stuff, which was great, which was the goal going into it, and was able to communicate that in a way that not only landed with the audience, but made the people like you who love that space, right, who are really passionate about the things that are going on there and the technology that's being used there, like making you happy with that presentation was better than making everybody, in the audience happy with it. And that was because you could have gone on stage and done all of these sessions yourself, right? And you guys deliberately took a step back, the whole team did, and said, we're going to create content and we're going to make it so that lots of people can share this. Mm-hmm. And I was just the first guinea pig of, we're really happy with the content. Now we just need somebody who doesn't live in this world to present it
exactly.
and try to do a good job with it. And I think that, it's a shame that whole Ignite tour got cut short, because that was that whole track was much more fun to deliver. The Modern Ops track was much more fun to deliver this year than it was the previous year.
Yeah.
Every time I got to go up there and present that content was a good time.
Yeah, totally. We should move on. But one last thing, I just remember being at the airport, headed back home. We were at the Paris airport, and I was like sending you a message saying, I'm so proud of you. My heart is swollen, and I'm going to go take, I need to spread the word to like some of the other people, like John Allspall and just a bunch of people who honestly had no like hands-on contribution to the presentation, but in the long play of this, they did.
Right.
They influenced me and others. Sure. And so the message that we were conveying is not a Microsoft message. This is just the tech industry's message of what current thinking is around this type of stuff. And for that to come from someone from Microsoft on stage at an event like that, and to have such good reaction and response from it. I was like, this is why I do this job. Yeah, totally.
And then COVID shut us all down. And now we sit in our homes with microphones.
And then I picked up cross stitching, and my cat won't leave my side. And sorry about the cat. That's Jolene.
Have we talked about national parks yet?
She's distracting me too. Yeah. So anyway, we've been going for a few minutes here, and as people have been rolling in, thank you to everybody who's joining us on the stream. My name is Jason Hand. This is Jeramiah Dooley, and we've got a lot of stuff we want to cover today, mostly focusing on things kind of floating around the topic of migrating to Azure, especially if you're in the enterprise world and used to the enterprise tooling. And I would say, even to take it even one step further on being specific, a lot of what Jeramiah works on is around the VMware space. So Jeramiah, maybe give us just a little bit more about your background, what it is that you like to talk about that when it's not post-incident reviews. Sure. and shoes and national parks. And then we'll go from there.
Sure. So my background is almost all infrastructure. I have been a network engineer for a company that built cardiac specialty hospitals. I've been a systems engineer. I've built physical data centers. I have run the managed services practices inside data center providers. And I guess around 2008, we started having this huge struggle with all of the servers in the data center. And I know that For some of the folks in the audience, they're probably going to be too young to even remember when this was an issue. But especially coming from a data center hosting background, the number of servers and the types of physical servers that we had to use to manage everything was just a disaster. It was so work intensive. The folks that worked for me and myself, we never got a weekend off because change control windows always had to happen on weekends, right?
Mm-hmm.
So much of the kind of infrastructure corollary to the things that we try to work out of the process with DevOps, right? The idea that we can do incremental, that we can do it quickly. Well, you can't really do that with a physical server.
Yeah.
And so about 2007, 2008 or so, this company called VMware brought out a product that introduced server virtualization, x86 server virtualization, into the marketplace in a way that was meaningful. I mean, there have been virtualization efforts for decades, but this was one specifically targeted at the Intel x86 based market. And within 18 months, we went from having dozens of different bespoke types of servers that were matched to the workloads that they were running to having standardized cookie cutter servers that we could virtualize anything we wanted onto it. Mm-hmm. This was, I think, still one of the biggest operational U-turns that I've ever experienced in my career. Was within the span of a year, my entire world changed. How I looked at my job changed, simply because we broke this construct that was workload to physical server.
Right. We created a new level of abstraction that kind of just changes the paradigm of,
But we didn't introduce a ton of more work to manage that abstraction. And I think that was the magic. The abstraction was good. The integration with Intel was good, but the tooling that sat on top of it was also good. So around 2008, the managed services org that I ran at the time in Charlotte, North Carolina, we introduced managed VMware as an offering, and it just went crazy. We ended up signing a service provider agreement with VMware. I think it was the second or third one that they'd ever signed globally at that point. And we ran a pretty sizable, for the time, hosted VMware environment. And that led me to all of the vendors who were selling the infrastructure that were being abstracted up through that. I moved to a company called VCE, which was a joint venture between VMware, Cisco, and EMC that built integrated stacks of infrastructure that were specifically designed to be used underneath VMware. And then from there, went to a storage company that was based in Boulder, Colorado, that ended up getting bought by NetApp, that was all specifically designed to be used under not just VMware alone at that time, but VMware and OpenStack and some of the open source and third-party abstraction layers as well. So when I came to Azure a little over 2 years ago, the idea was that within our team, there was a really good range of how do we take care of the pure native developers, and how do we move people along the continuum to being a native Azure developer, right? So we do a good job with functions, and I think I've got a pretty good slide that puts this together that we'll look at here in a little bit. But there's a benefit that Azure has. There's a competitive advantage that I think Azure has, and that's this huge install base of Microsoft customers that are on-prem, a huge amount of those who are abstracting the hardware using VMware and then running the Windows-based or Microsoft-based workloads on top of it. So the point of the team that I run, of the part of the org that I'm in, is we want developers on Azure. Ultimately, we want people building stateless apps. We want people using serverless and functions, and we want people being Azure, open up VS Code and build things right directly against Azure. The reality is there's a huge number of people and companies who need help kind of moving along that continuum. And when you've invested shockingly large amounts of money into the operational tools and processes and tooling and all of the things that you're using to run the workloads today, that move into the cloud can seem really daunting. It can feel like I have to give up everything. I have to change everything in order to move anything.
Yeah.
And I think that VMware in general, but Azure specifically, has tried to build some ways for us to get the infrastructure people into Azure and comfortable, so that the folks who are developers, the folks who are building applications, who are today being told you have to use on-prem infrastructure, you're not allowed to use these Azure services that you may want to use to build your app, we can get them into an Azure environment where they can do those things faster.
Right. Yeah, and I had a question or something that came up as you were discussing sort of the evolution of virtualization. Do you recall what your first like virtual machine was? Like what you actually did with that first attempt?
So my first ever virtual machine was a Windows 2000 Active Directory controller. And I did an Active Directory controller because it was the smallest Windows deployment that I could get my hands on, right? This was long before we had optimized images where we could cut all of the stuff out to make it really small for virtual machines.
Right.
And my entire goal was, VMware had the magic button that allowed me to move a running workload from one piece of hardware to another piece of hardware. At that point, only proactively, right? It didn't have the failover features that came later. This was, I could click on it and say migrate to another server, and it would migrate it. And so I had a Windows box, and I had an RDP session to that Windows server, and I was just running a command prompt with just a repeating ping, so that I could migrate it from the VMware side, see that it was moving from one physical server to another, and see that it was like that the server was still responding. Mm-hmm. And even today, it will drop one ping. Like as it stages everything up, and then it has to take the memory, like everything that's in memory, and it writes it to a file and then moves the file over. Mm-hmm. The entire period of time that it takes to do that is the time that it will take to drop exactly one ping. Wow. And so even today, for the probably thousands of people that will watch this that have either a history with VMware or who are still using VMware today, the magic that is vMotion, to be able to move that workload from one side to the other and not have a single user of those services know that you just evacuated an entire physical server so that you can do work or decommission it, is hands down still one of the, I remember sitting at my desk watching it going, there's no way that this is actually going to work, is there? Mm-hmm. But it was a Windows 2000 Active Directory controller.
Nice. I'm pretty sure mine was Ubuntu, like a really, whatever the current.
That doesn't surprise me at all.
Yeah, I was like, because it's funny, like I feel like I have this weird like circle with Microsoft. I think a lot of us have, especially, so at one point you kind of like, change your opinion on things. And what changed my opinion on things, I was using Exchange as a mail server. This is when I was like head of IT at a small business. Yeah. And everything was fine. But then Exchange just became like, I don't know. We were having a lot of spam problems. We'd get a virus every once in a while. It was just a lot of administration. And I had too many other things on my plate. So I started exploring a little bit and found out this other open source email product called Zimbra. And Zimbra only ran on Linux, SUSE Linux. And so anyway, I started going down the path of using Linux to solve my email problem. And eventually that led me completely away from Microsoft. Like I got all into Linux or having a Mac. And then I went probably 15 or more years without a PC, without even touching a Microsoft thing other than maybe a spreadsheet or something every once in a while. And then here I am back, full circle, like literally on a live stream for Microsoft talking.
There's
about
actually
things.
irony there, because you know who bought Zimbra?
No.
VMware.
Oh wow. You know what? I didn't know that. I remember
Zimbra ended up being bought by VMware, and then they ended up spinning it back out. I don't know who actually owns it, or even if it's still out there at this point. But at one point, VMware was actually going to launch its own public cloud, and Zimbra was one of the things that they felt like they could offer as a service. I mean, the same way that Microsoft offers software services, as Azure offerings. Zimbra was one of the ones that they were going to do, and they've since pivoted. And there was a bunch of Zimbra-like stuff, alternative ways to run these productivity and business apps that they've since spun off. But it's funny that Zimbra was the goal there, because Zimbra ended up being right back in the same ecosystem.
That's great. Yeah, I liked saved the day with that one, and it was also scary too. Moving into the open source world and trying to solve like business decisions with stuff that had a little bit too much unknown. There was no support for a lot of stuff, and anyway, it all worked out. Yeah. So let's pivot a little bit here.
Okay.
Thanks everybody for joining us. We want to, I guess, maybe reset a little bit. Like, we understand virtualization. We know who VMware is.
Sure.
There's a relationship between VMware and Azure, and as you went over, like the big spot people find them in is they see all the benefits of being in the cloud, moving to the cloud, but a lot of their workloads and everything are whether it's VMware or whatever, they feel stuck. They can't really get these things moved.
And it's kind of one way or the other, right? On one side, there are things that they have to solve. They're running out of data center space.
Yeah.
Power and cooling is becoming prohibitively expensive. The management of hardware just isn't really core to anyone's business. I mean, unless you're a trading company who's writing your own system level BIOS in order to improve performance, and I've met those guys, they are crazy. Unless you're one of those groups, the hardware isn't your core competency. Managing it isn't your core competency. It's distracting you from something else. So on one hand, there are lots of good reasons for moving specific types of workloads or moving entire sets of workloads into a cloud provider. Mm-hmm. And Microsoft and every other cloud provider has lots of content to be able to use to put together all of the migration plans, and using Azure Migrate to figure out what sort of resources am I going to need on the other side, and then migrating data in. Like, we have all of these tools. Mm-hmm. Where that runs into trouble is on the other side of it, when a company looks and sees that we've built our entire operations practice around this abstraction layer, around these tools, around these APIs, around this infrastructure as code. We've built our entire environments around these. And so if I want to move a single workload, even just into an infrastructure as a service VM on the Azure side, all of a sudden I have two things to manage now instead of one. Yep. I've got a whole new skill set that I need to be able to bring in there. I can't do it in a planned manner. I can't schedule which workloads we're going to move, because some workloads have dependencies on other workloads. Mm-hmm. And so what VMware has tried to do with Azure, but to be fair to VMware, with all 6 of their tier 1 cloud providers, is to try and build an environment where end users have more control over how and when and even if they migrate into a cloud native space, while at the same time maintaining all of the investment that they've made into both the tooling, right, the scripts and the all of the things in the background that make every IT operation actually work, and then all of the interfaces, all of the things that they've been using, the run books, all of the stuff that goes into running a 24-hour IT shop, being able to translate all of that directly in, while still getting out of the business of running data centers, getting out of the business of managing servers and upgrading servers and those sorts of things. So the overall goal is to try to find a balance between those two, so that customers can do what makes sense, while at the same time being a lot more in control of when they start to give up the things they've invested in.
Yeah. Yep. And it's just sort of the growth and the maturation of an organization, an IT organization, as they look for ways to not create more work, but at the same time be able to support more workers and more things that are happening. And when you can move some of that stuff over to a managed scenario, and you don't have to touch it as far as upgrades and patches and all that kind of stuff, then you can just focus on just your data or just your code or whatever it is. That's enablement. That's making it so that your developers are...
We see this all the way across, right? The developers have the same, developers don't want to manage stacks of containers.
Mm-hmm.
right? That's not a core competency. Is it important for them to deliver what they need to deliver? It may be. There may need to be, tests or whatever thrown in there to make sure that everything is working the way it should be. But we spend a lot of time clearing the deck so that groups of people can be very highly focused on their core competencies, on the things that they have to deliver. And this is really no different. We're just trying to leverage the scope and all of the services that are included with Azure to not only allow these customers to get out of the business of doing things they didn't want to do and weren't getting any value from anyway, but then also putting themselves in a position to make choices around what type of service do I want to run, where do I want to run it, and then what does that look like from a management environment? Because the flip side is we've seen customers who have come to us and said, we've been told we are allowed to have $0 of budget for infrastructure for the next fiscal year. And now it's a fire drill. Now it's move things poorly and things perform poorly and the end user suffers. And we're trying to make it so that there's a middle ground there where we can migrate people into a cloud first environment without having to give up all of the skilling and training and tools that you've built over the last 10 years of your career as an individual and your, as a group from an organizational standpoint in order to be able to do that.
Oops, I was muted. Yeah, totally. There's so many challenges, and it's hard for us to really. I feel like I've been out of the game of being like a head of an IT ops group and having all these challenges. But I know, the things I've learned over that part of my, let's say, career, and the things really that I've been exposed to just here in I'd say the last 6 years, no matter what if you got a greenfield scenario where you're starting over from scratch and you get to pick from any of the cloud providers and just start building like a startup, or if you're in an enterprise who's been around for 100 and something years and you just got a lot of stuff that can't go away, you have different challenges. But at the end of the day, the monitoring stuff is kind of key, because without visibility on what's going on, you don't know if things are working good or working bad. And a big win of this whole stuff that you're going to walk us through here in a moment and give us some more details, both within Azure and also I think you got some slides you want to show off. It's once you get sort of integrated into Azure, even though you still feel as though you're running VMware and you're using the same tools you used to, you have all that monitoring. Yes. You have all that like underlying stuff that just sort of comes with the service, which makes it a little easier to start making plans for that work. Because anyway, I think I'm jumping the gun a little bit.
It's funny you bring up monitoring because as VMware has grown from a product, right, they were a hypervisor, to a hypervisor with a management package on top of it, to where they are now is they are software-defined storage that's integrated in. They are software-defined networking that's integrated in. They have monitoring, and they have log analytics, and they have alerting, and there's so much stuff that, again, if I'm a VMware customer, I love this. I love that all of these pieces integrate in together, and I have one support mechanism to be able to do it. But if I move to any cloud provider, like even taking off my Azure hat, if I move to any cloud provider, there's an entirely new monitoring program that has entirely different ways of ingesting data, that has entirely different ways of displaying alerts, that, and every cloud provider I go to is going to, by design, be different in how they do that. And if I'm running an enterprise IT organization and I realize that even moving a single workload into Azure means that I have to deploy all new runbooks for my support teams, that I have to figure out new ways of pulling the data that I need from that workload and displaying it. And am I going to integrate it into the same environment? Like, am I going to do that as an HTTP like webhook request into my VMware tooling? Like, I can very easily see how quickly it just gets to be like, you know what? We're good. Like, we'll use Office 365 and we'll run everything else on-prem.
Or, it's like, I don't know if I'm going to stay at this company for another 5 years, so I'll let that be somebody else's problem.
Right. So I think what everybody is trying to say to those customers is there's some middle ground for us to be able to take the best of the cloud really tee ourselves up for some interesting integration points, and then make that transition, make that migration, both from an operational standpoint as well as from a workload standpoint, something that we can have a lot more control over, something that we can schedule better, something that we can task up or tool people and prepare them for that better, so that it's not just a disaster when we start learning things in production.
Yeah.
So I think that's where VMware is coming at it from. That's certainly the spirit of the partnership that we have between Azure and VMware. And so hopefully, and I hate slides as much as anybody else at this point, especially on Twitch, but there's a small handful of them, particularly for the folks who are watching or who will watch, around, at the end of the day, if everything is running great on-prem in VMware, what do I get? Right? What's in this for me? What can I use to sell this to my leadership to get us and the developers who are building on top of this on-prem platform a little bit closer to something that looks more like what they would like to see?
Yeah. Okay. Well, you got those slides handy? Is that something we want to hop over to? And let's just switch to your desktop here and go from there.
All right. So you should see infinite use.
Right now I see infinite me's.
Excellent. So let's do that. And let's make sure everything comes up.
Yeah.
All right.
Full screen here. Yeah. Okay. So we got you.
All right. So we talked a little bit about that continuum, right? And we wanted to match up the Azure advocacy teams to the different places on this continuum, because each one of these is going to have different Azure products that are involved, but also really different audiences and tool sets that go with it. So the rebuilding, start from scratch and write new code, that's kind of that greenfield that you were talking about. It's certainly great to have. Very, very rarely do we get the opportunity to do that. But when we can, and we really want to, kind of accelerate the innovation, this is where we can do some really cool things with all of the cloud native tools that we're talking about. And that's really, this is going to be your serverless and your microservices and your functions and logic apps and all of the really fun cloud things that there are to be able to build on top of that. As we move to the left, the services become a little bit more primitive. They become a little bit more foundational. The benefit of them becomes more in how easy it is to move into Azure and less about the features or functionality of the things that we can build with it. So when we move down into the refactoring, this is really where we're talking about Kubernetes and containers and platform as a service, and places where we can increase the efficiency but still maintain some of that portability that we built in there. The rehosting, I don't know if you can see it, but I'm wearing my OK Boomer shirt for you today.
Here, let's switch back.
I don't know. So the rehosting is really where we are trying to find ways for customers to bridge that gap without losing all of the things that they've invested in. And this is really where those foundational infrastructure as a service, Azure VMs and file storage and block storage and those sorts of things, are really going to live. And this is really kind of dead on where that Azure VMware Solutions or those Azure dedicated, because we do this for a couple different products. It's not just VMware. We do this for NetApp storage. We do this for Cray supercomputers. We do this for SAP. We do this for Oracle. Like, there's a couple different places where the lift just seems really heavy, and we can give people the opportunity to rehost and maybe make that a little bit easier. So this is just kind of visually, this is that continuum that we were talking about, where if you look at it from a skill set standpoint, all the way on the right, we've got our pure Azure native developers. This is where we're catering to folks with VS Code and all the plugins and all the different language supports and the SDKs and the APIs and all of that. The refactor and re-architect, this is where we really lean on our DevOps folks around how do we blur the line between the operation of the infrastructure underneath it and then how it gets used by the developers sitting on top of it, and how do we transition those processes and the way that we write code and the way that we test code and the way that we deliver code into it. And the rehosting is very much the enterprise platforms and tools group where I live, around how do we build a bridge to an organization who may feel like they're an island because of what they've invested in and because of everything that they've got put together from a process standpoint. Does that make sense?
Yeah, totally. Yeah.
Okay. The key here is, and we say this to the VMware folks all the time, it's just VMware. There's nothing special about it. There's nothing custom about it. The software that we use, the infrastructure that we deploy it on, the workloads that you can run, the level of support that you can have, the scalability that it supports, the tools that you can use, the plugins and the scripts and the infrastructure as code, everything that you're using today just works. It's simply a VMware cluster that happens to run in our data center instead of their data center. And everything that they would use from a VMware standpoint or from a traditional existing operations standpoint is going to transfer straight over. We're not building something special. We're not building some snowflake that isn't going to take upgrades or isn't going to be supported by VMware. It is simply a VMware environment that is built on top of dedicated Azure infrastructure that both VMware and Microsoft are standing behind. So
can't even tell the difference.
And by design, right? Again, if we want to build that bridge and allow customers to use all of those things that they've developed, then making them jump through hoops simply to get to use the same platform in a different data center is completely against the grain of what we're trying to do there. So we say it over and over. It's not meant to insult VMware when we say this is just boring VMware. It is vanilla out of the box. It's the same vSAN storage. It's the same NSX networking. It's the same vCenter that sits on top of it. It's the same UI that you open in your browser. It's just VMware.
Shouldn't be that scary. Yeah.
It shouldn't be that scary. And anytime, particularly with as aggressive as all the cloud providers have been on the we cater to developers with APIs side of things, sometimes there's just a little bit of hand holding that has to be done in order to get everybody on the same page. But it's just VMware. There's nothing scary here. There should be nothing unfamiliar.
And I would also say, when you think about all the different cloud providers out there, who's known like the business and enterprise world the best, through their entire legacy, and that's Microsoft. And so this isn't like a new challenge or a new problem for anyone. And I think, just the fact that we've always been sort of the enterprise tooling choice for many reasons, although that's changed, more recently. I don't know. It just feels like this is a problem that we get pretty, we understand maybe more than others.
Yep. And VMware gets it. I mean, VMware understands the value of the platform that they've built, but also understands that for some customers, only being deployable in an on-prem configuration is a limitation that will lead them to look at other alternatives. Right. And so from VMware standpoint, this is as smart as it is from the customer standpoint, and frankly, as smart as it is from Microsoft standpoint. Like, there's no downside to this for anybody involved. The customers get everything that they're used to. They just get it in a consumption model that they've aspired to and not been able to reach. VMware gets to continue being VMware and build, that magic button that we have as operations people come to know and love for the last, 20 years at this point. And, and Azure gets to be the bridge builder. We get to build the bridge over into that on-prem environment. And then we get to start to look at some of the services that we can offer in there.
Which I think they would really love a lot of that stuff, especially the monitoring stuff we were talking about, like application insights and, the application map. There's just so many more ways to like understand what's really going on in your infrastructure and applications.
Well, let's talk about that. It is not only good to be able to have access to some of the tools that we've built. It's also good to be able to have access to just the sheer scope of the Azure footprint. And so being able to direct connect back into a data center using all of the standard Azure methods to be able to do that, express route, high-speed bandwidth, whatever it is that makes sense, and then be able to deploy and manage a VMware environment that is exactly what you expect it to be, but then also have access to the native services, to the third-party services, including those that are delivered across regions. So being able to leverage multiple regions for HA or DR, being able to use native VMware services to do that, or as workloads start moving into the Azure services and Azure native environment, being able to use the Azure services pieces to be able to manage that redundancy between regions. The giving an organization who may have only ever been able to manage financially to build out one or two data centers, or even a small constellation of them, in a different part of the world, giving them the breadth of all of Azure and saying, put it where you want to put it where it makes sense, put it where your customers are. The same things that we tell developers when they're deploying things into different regions, we can now say to enterprise customers or VMware customers who are looking to spread workloads out over those regions, but then still manage it through the VMware platform.
Yep.
And the native services and the third-party services, that's where things really start to get fun. So this is a not comprehensive list of these service names that will be available on a first-party basis directly into AVS, meaning these services will have full network adjacency. Your customers, the people who are using those VMs, the apps that are using those VMs on the VMware side, are not going to know if one of those VMs happens to move over into an Azure service. An example of that, on the Azure VM infrastructure as a service side, is if we've spent the last 10 years getting really good at virtualizing SQL servers. We know how to scale them. We have them built out across multiple clusters so we can do disaster recovery between them. We're really good at managing SQL servers. Well, arguably, Microsoft is probably better at managing SQL servers than most of our customers, and we offer that as a service. So if I wanted to keep all of the front end and all of the middleware portions of my application inside VMware, but I wanted to migrate to an Azure SQL server on the back end so that Microsoft takes care of the infrastructure and Microsoft takes care of patches and upgrades and all of that stuff that I don't want to, and I can just focus on the data, which has always been what I really cared about anyway. I just did all the rest of it because I had to, right? Kind of going back to your Exchange admin, right. All I really cared about was the mailboxes.
And that's all my bosses wanted too. They just wanted their dang mail.
Right, but I had 27 different things that I had to take care of every day in order to be able to get that. Yeah. We want that network adjacency to be kind of the magic trick here. Keep using VMware, use the same tools, nothing changes, everything's okay. This list of services, and this will get significantly larger over the next month or so as we go forward, this list of services becomes the things that customers can look at and say, does that make sense for me? Does it make sense for me to look at a cloud-based log analytics service? Mm-hmm. Does it make sense for me to look at an integrated security center and update manager to be able to do security assessments of these individual VMs and then remediate them? Right? Do I want to run Active Directory as VMs inside VMware? Or do I want to run that as a cloud service? Right? I want that discussion inside operations teams to happen because it's possible now, but also I want it to be voluntary. They can choose when it is that they take advantage of any of this. They can choose at what schedule or at what pace things migrate. Would it be a huge operational burden or a huge operational change to move Active Directory from on-prem VMs into an Azure Active Directory instance? No. It would be almost no operational change whatsoever. So a customer might say, that's a good place for us to start. We can reclaim some capacity on the VMware cluster. Maybe we don't have to expand out another node in the cluster. By taking some of these services, moving them into Azure, end users aren't going to care. We get more scalability, better support, better licensing arrangements, whatever the benefit is on the other side of that. But none of that gets forced on them. None of that ends up being something that they have to that they have to do, kind of at the pointy end of the stick.
Right.
It becomes something that they can do when they want to and as they want to going forward. And so this is really, it's the least interesting slide visually, but I think probably the most powerful from a story standpoint. These all become, so today, these are options that 0% of on-prem VMware customers have available to them.
Okay.
The minute that migration happens, even though nothing has changed on the VMware operations side, nothing has changed on the VMware software side, everything that's on here immediately became an option that a customer can choose to integrate right directly into that environment.
Yeah.
Simply because they're on the platform.
Yep. And I love it. That log analytics is huge. Just having that available to you.
You and I have played around with log analytics kind of as part of some of those the after action report things, and it's pretty spectacular, and something that I don't think, especially the enterprise customers, like they just don't ever get exposed to that.
Right.
I mean, that's not something that they would ever be able to see, and now it becomes something that obviously there's a free tier of log analytics, and you can start playing with it, and you can get comfortable with it, and you can figure out where it works inside your environment, and then make that switch without having any sort of cost from an operational standpoint, which you just can't do when you're sitting in your own data center.
And I will say that, some of the other things that we talked about on the tour, for example, setting service level indicators, service level objectives, some of that stuff seems foreign to a lot of companies simply because they just don't have the right tools available to them to design something like that and to calculate something like that and to set up error budgets and to, do some of that more modern thinking when it comes to systems. We want to be more proactive rather than reactive. It's a response, not necessarily a reaction. And there's a big difference. One is you're a little bit more prepared and you have tools. If you think of it like firefighting, like the firefighters don't show up at a fire without anything. They had things in place that let them know there was a fire as quickly as possible. They have the trucks pointed out the door, the hoses are wound up, everything's ready to go. That's sort of the mentality the stance and the position you have to take these days. But if you don't have the right tools and you don't have the right information, you can't even start down that path. Yeah. So just having some of these things right out of the box is a huge thing.
Yeah. And if you think about it in the developer space, we had this idea of moving to become a cloud developer. Right. And that involved understanding which services you had available to you, how they integrate, how how they're built, what performance is it that they're appropriate for. You had to know which tools you had kind of going into this idea that I'm going to build this app that does whatever it is that it does. On the enterprise infrastructure side, we were always imploring them to think of themselves as service providers. Right? Think of you as an IT shop as a service provider to all of the workload owners and application owners and developers that are working on top of the platform. And once you do that, this idea of availability targets and what is significant and what isn't significant and how do we respond to things and what obligation do we assume onto ourselves to those consumers, the mindset really starts to come around, and VMware's done a good job of building some of those tools in there. It becomes something we can really fast track when we give customers the ability to maintain everything that they've had, but then introduce all the rest of these tools and the things that we know inside Azure we have the ability to provide. It's almost like you're a really good firefighter and you're fighting a very specific type of fire, and the tools that you prep are for that specific type of fire. We're going to broaden the scope. We're going to make it so that you can be effective in a lot more situations, and we're going to give you a lot of tools that maybe you didn't think of before that could help with that you wouldn't be able to get to otherwise. Right. So it's really, again, it kind of all goes back to that. We don't want to change anything until customers are ready to change, because VMware has done right by them and their operations teams for so long that pulling that out of there doesn't do anybody any good. But if we can maintain the success that they've had and give them this entire list of things that they can now choose to integrate in, right? Like load balancers. I can't tell you, even as a service provider, how many times a DDoS or something that was being routed down to a virtual firewall ended up becoming a gigantic issue, because that bandwidth is shared between the VMs on a host and the hosts in a cluster and the rack that all of the gear is in. And the idea of saying, I never have to use a virtualized firewall again, I can simply push that application edge or that workload edge up into the Azure cloud and let Azure handle DDoSing and IP addressing and gateway routing and tooling for being able to do application discovery, like all of that stuff. The ability to be able to say, I just want to hand this to Azure and you just send me traffic. Mm-hmm. I'll maintain the data and the applications and all the pieces. You just send me valid traffic that is actually trying to get to them. The amount of time and energy and resources that just that alone saves is pretty staggering. And we've got so many good tools inside the Azure toolbox to be able to help with that immediately become available once we move that platform over.
So let's say I'm in. You've sold me. I love this idea. It seems like it's going to make my life a lot easier, and prepared for the future. And I don't know, maybe create a little bit of buzz around the office about some new cool things. What? I know you have some other things to cover, but hopefully you can show us like what's step one once you have like an Azure account, But let's.
No, absolutely. In fact, let's the rest of these, they're boring slides, and people can go get them off the website if they want to. What I really wanted to do was we're going to do kind of two parts here. If we wanted to go get started, especially for you and I, Jason, that is kind of always going to start on docs.microsoft.com.
Right.
And we've got an entire set of documentation that is available today inside Azure to be able to figure out what it is that we're doing. And the number one with that is always going to be an assessment. And being able to use an Azure tool, so in this case, that would be Azure Migrate, to do a data ingestion of an existing VMware environment and just decide what are we working with here, right? How many hosts would we need, and how much storage would we need, and what sort of networking requirements are we going to need? That's going to kind of be the place that we start doing that first. It doesn't require an appliance to be deployed on site or anything like that. We can use the native VMware tools to output things into a CSV and import it. We're pretty flexible in how we get that data in, but that's the place that we're going to start. We need to figure out what are we looking for so that we can do boring cloud things like negotiating price and figuring out how long this is going to take and what regions do we want to deploy into. Kind of all of that starts with the assessment.
Right.
Once the assessment is done and we say we've pulled all this data in from the local environment, and we know how big it is that we want to deploy. We need a 3-node cluster. We need a 5-node cluster. We want it in 2 different data centers. We need this much storage, whatever the answer is. Mm-hmm. The next thing that we're going to do is we're actually going to go into the Azure portal and deploy it. Now, as you can imagine, an Azure service that requires the deployment of physical servers that include absolute gobs of solid state storage is not one of those ones that we want people accidentally clicking on and spinning up a cluster somewhere. So there's a whitelisting process where we work with customers so that they can go into the portal and they can see all the pieces, and then they can start to deploy. And once everything's lined up and the subscription has been whitelisted and we're ready to go, the deployment process is pretty simple. And I'll flip back over here. There's again, because it's all whitelisted, it's probably a little bit easier to do it just with a video here. It looks just like any other Azure service, right? Again, we're going to tell what subscription are we attaching this to, what resource group is this going to get delivered into, which location do we want. We're going to give it a name. We're going to pick between the different hardware models based on the outcome of that assessment. We're going to pick the number of hosts, and then we're going to do some boring, standard VMware stuff around what's my admin passwords for the networking and for the administration, and what's the addressing block that we're going to use from an IP standpoint. And then we're going to click the create button at the bottom. And we're done. like
and that's it.
That's it. And what's going to happen is it's going to take about 90 minutes. And I think the fastest one that I've seen was somewhere in the 82, 83 minutes to get done. At the end of it, when normally you would have the little message that comes up in the top right in the portal that says your resource has been deployed, and then you click on the message and it gives you the link to the resource so that you can go do it. You're going to get the exact same thing here, but the link is going to be your vCenter login. And it's going to open up in a browser, and it's going to bring up that cluster that you just created with those IP addresses that you just allocated, with the storage that was included in that hardware, and you have a VMware cluster.
Magic.
Right? And so the things that have to happen around it, how are we going to connect to the environment from a network perspective? Are we standing up VPNs? Are we using ExpressRoute? Do we have a networking space to be able to deploy it into? Like there's a few prerequisites there that we've got a checklist that the Azure teams will help work you through. But the actual deployment process is fill out the form, tell me how many hosts you want of which node type in which data center, click create, and go grab lunch.
Right.
It's kind of a long lunch, but go grab lunch.
We're all taking long lunches lately.
Right. I mean, maybe, we've all built gyms in our garages at this point. So go work out, maybe come back, and now you have this VMware environment that is network adjacent to all of those services that we wanted to be able to use.
Right. And you don't even, you can almost like take a break longer than just lunch, right? Like once you get things up and going, like there really isn't that big of a difference. There's going to be a roadmap you're going to want to have to start utilizing some of those new tools. And then, we were talking before the show too, like, okay, I've got everything. I've filled out this form. All of my hardware has now been provisioned. Everything's there. Maybe I give myself a little breathing space before I bite off another big, step. But what would be that next big step, or that next step, I guess?
I guess the low-hanging fruit, once we've moved everything in and operationally we're secure, we've got, we've migrated, we've got the cluster built. I think the first thing that we would do is look at, are we going to migrate workloads from our existing on-prem environment in? And because it's just an empty VMware cluster, right, we still have to get the VMs from where they are to where they're going. One of the tools that we have for that, and again, we can use any VMware supported tool. We could use a third-party tool, or we could use some of the VMware first-party things. And one of the ones that's included with the Azure VMware solution is VMware HCX. And HCX is kind of a VMware specific supercharged version of Azure Migrate, because it will do not just migration from site to site, but upgrades and replatforms at the same time. So if my on-prem version is a lower software version than the one that I have in Azure, it will do the remediation and upgrades as it goes through. It'll rebalance across them. Like there's a lot of really cool stuff that this does inside a VMware environment, but it's a tool, importantly, it's a tool that VMware customers are going to be familiar with. It's something that they have probably used or at least had access to and have seen training content on. And so being able to say that first thing that we do when we start moving workloads in here, use the VMware tool, use the cross vCenter fling that VMware has out there, where we can power down and move over and power up any workload, using something that you're familiar with. We want Microsoft to kind of get out of the way there and let VMware operators move or rebalance workloads the way they have always done it between clusters.
I just had a little flashback, PTSD of migrating and using like ODBC drivers and all these different connectors, and now it's just like so much easier.
Yeah.
Kids today have it so much easier.
Well,
are we the boomers in this scenario?
I categorically am. You get to do cool cloud stuff. But yeah, I think there's different challenges at this point, right? I mean, I'm confident that the people who are running workloads at scale in an on-prem VMware environment today have challenges with scale or performance or storage or things that I didn't ever have to think about when I was running that type of business.
Yeah.
In
also,
the past.
we're not baby boomers. We weren't born during
That's
the
true.
baby boom. So
No.
I think if you really want to get technical, no, we can't. We're too young.
We're too young. I don't hear you're too young.
I don't get to say.
So
I was just about to say I don't get to say or hear you're too young very often.
So we create the assessment. We talked a little bit about that. We use HCX to be able to do the migration. We talked a little bit about that. The other half of this, so we've got lots of resources for people to be able to get started. The middle squishy part that we don't talk about a whole lot is the people, right? And kind of going back to the beginning of ours, the people are really important to me. I think the people are really important to you, and that's something that we've focused a lot on. I've been part of the VMware community for more than a decade at this point, and I see the anxiety that people have anytime you start talking about a move to the cloud. Like it's just human nature for people to be comfortable. Even you and I, when we came into Microsoft, to be comfortable with the things that we know we're good at.
My favorite meme about this whole thing is, here we go, showing our age again. Do you remember the Pee Wee movies, Pee Wee's Playhouse?
Yeah.
There was one where he saves like all the animals in a pet store, but he saves all the lizards and snakes till the very end. And I feel like that's been me in so many cases where I'm just like, oh no, I know I got to do it, but I'm not doing it yet. It yet.
Well, and in this case, sometimes we end up being the snakes and lizards for last because those are just choices that we made. And sometimes in the case of VMware, it's just that they're really, really good at what they do.
Yeah.
I mean, I feel bad that it's a world-class product supported by a world-class company and significantly talented men and women who are running it. And there's a level of anxiety around change in general. And when that change is pretty big, especially the way cloud has been communicated before, which is rebuild all of these apps as native Azure applications or services, I get where that anxiety is coming from. So one of the things that we've done, that we've participated in a lot as a company, but certainly that I've invested in as a professional, is that education side of things. And how do we help people get comfortable with it, whether that's going out to the VMware user groups and doing presentations, which I did a whole bunch of last year to introduce this to people and to get feedback from them, or whether it's creating content that gets shared. One of the community groups that I absolutely adore and have been working with for a long time is called the V Brown Bag. And the V Brown Bag started as a bunch of us sitting around going, I just ran into something at work and I think someone else would benefit from me. Like, let's do a quick conference call and kind of get everybody on the same page, and I'll tell you what I figured out. Kind of the outgrowth of the blog that everybody had at one point that was, guess what crazy stuff happened to me today? Here, I'll write it down so that I can search for it later. V Brown Bag has taken that to a whole new level. It's now, I want to say 3 or 4 international podcasts in different languages, but all still around that same core of the community giving back to the community. This is all folks who are doing these recordings and being part of these webinars on their own dime, on their own time. In many cases, it's sharing content that they've created in order to be able to help people, whether it's with study guides or with new technologies or anything like that. And the V Brown Bags are live, so in whatever time zone you are, in whatever language it is that you speak, there are multiple V Brown Bags for you to jump in and learn. All of the content is then cataloged for later, and it's also all made available on YouTube. Okay. So this is the 14 videos that we've put up specifically about Azure. And there's actually a couple of them down here that Pumala and I and teammate Thomas Maurer have gone through and done. Ben DeQual, like there's a bunch of really excellent resources in here who are trying to build that familiarity or that relationship, like the first steps of building the footings of that bridge over into those environments so that it's not such a jarring change.
I put the link to the V Brown bag for all the VMware stuff into chat, but I don't have the link to this video playlist for YouTube. Do you mind maybe dropping that into our back channel chat, and I can share that with everybody?
Yeah, I will.
And thank you for those that are maybe just joining us. We're talking about mostly VMware, but really just the challenge that a lot of people have in terms of moving into the cloud, especially if they've got a bunch of stuff that's already running, it's running well, it's running in VMware virtualization. How do we get those things over? Jeramiah Dooley is with me today. Jeremiah is an expert in this area, really tight with the VMware community. So a lot of you, if you're in that space and in that scenario, maybe reach out to follow Jeremiah on Twitter.
Yeah, and I've got an ask of everybody.
Yeah,
so
okay.
We're almost done with this part of it, and then I've got an ask for everyone around kind of what everyone can do as part of this community here as we kind of head into the VMware user conference, the VMworld global user conference that they have, and some stuff that we've got going on around there. All right, so I'll paste that link for the V Brown Bag playlist into the Twitch chat.
If it doesn't let you, just put it into our Skype chat, because sometimes it doesn't let non-admins.
Oh, no chat for me. Oh, it's a URL.
Yeah.
Let's see. Huh? It looks like it went.
I don't. It just shows asterisks for me. Yeah, I think it's
okay,
a shadow.
Yeah, I'll here.
Just drop it into our chat, and I'll put it in there for everybody.
I can do that. Okay. So we've got all of the V Brown bags which are live. We've got the YouTube, which are video on demand. It covers Azure, but it covers basically everything that could even partially tangentially touch the VMware ecosystem is in there. And all of that is available if you are if you're still driving in the pandemic, or if you just like to, go sit on the deck and listen to podcasts. All of them are also available through Apple Podcasts or any of the podcasting networks that you would normally use. So just to kind of recap, to finish up there's a whole overview of the service that's on the Azure portal. We've got lots of documentation here. We're in the process of building out the Microsoft Learn modules for AVS. So for those of you who have kind of moved past the step of what is this and into the I want to skill up, right? I want to see what this looks like. I want to feel it. I want to watch what happens as it deploys. I want to see what I can see from the VMware side versus what I can see from the Azure side. It's in process. Shannon Keene and I are putting together the content that will ultimately end up over in Microsoft Learn. But for right now, the docs is there, and there's lots of tutorials around how to do different things inside AVS. So this is the place to go for now. We'll introduce and share out all of the Learn resources as we go. There are a bunch of demo videos. And right now, these are only available internally, and my team is in the process of taking them and producing them, I guess, for lack of a better word, so that we can share them out on YouTube. So you'll notice that they kind of match up with the tutorials that are in the doc section. But if you are looking at anything on that screen there, and there are any of the demos or any of the scripts that are used to build out the demos that are of interest to you, please feel free to reach out to me on Twitter and let me know, and I'll make sure that you get a copy of whatever pieces of content that makes sense for you. So once we're skilled up, once we know what it is, once we figured out that this is something that's important to us, how are we going to use it? We build out an Azure Migrate project, and we ingest all of the data from our on-prem and figure out what it is that we need to deploy. We deploy it using the Azure portal and get everything stood up and validated that the cluster is solid and available and all of our best practices have been applied. Then we use a tool, VMware HCX or otherwise, to migrate workloads in there. And then at that point, we really have the ability to start looking at that list of first-party services and figuring out, are there things that I can't do on-prem that Azure affords me the ability to do that we want to start being able to, start integrating into that larger environment. And then, of course, from a community standpoint, being able to bring as much of that content. And if there's content that you don't see that you want to see, you can always reach out, and we're happy to put together one of these webinars. I know that they're actually in the planning stages right now for doing a deep dive for the VMware solutions across multiple cloud providers, which should be pretty fun. Every cloud provider is going to have a little bit different spin on the value proposition or the integration points or that sort of thing. And so giving customers the ability from a VMware context to look at the different cloud providers is actually pretty cool.
Excellent. Yeah, it's great to see so much new stuff coming. It's not just the tech that's there that makes it easy, and then there's some things that are in preview that are going to be coming here even. Is it going to be at that conference that stuff is going to be?
Yeah. So okay. Let's talk about VMworld. VMworld is usually held at the end of September every year, and it's usually a huge thing, like most tech conferences, where everybody's all in one place. And unfortunately, that's not going to happen at all. And the thing that suffers most in the virtual conferences is the community. I think that Build probably did the best job that I've seen yet of making it something that was friendly for the users. And I think that we saw that reflected in the number of people just the overwhelming number of people who tuned in that we would have never seen in an on-premises type environment.
Totally.
And VMworld is no exception. I mean, VMworld is one of those places where for the last 5 years or so, all of the sessions are available via video afterwards. So we go for the community. We go to find out what's cool to learn. We go to find out what people are working on or where they've moved to. We may go to a session or two, but it's really about that ecosystem of partners and customers and community members that exists around it.
Right.
That's really, again, it's important to the partnership between Azure and VMware. It's really important to me personally that we find a way to maintain as much of that VMware community as we possibly can. So what we've done is we've built out a Discord server. And since we're on Twitch, I'm confident that there are people here who are going to be very familiar with Discord. I love it. I mean, obviously we have Teams and Slack and Zoom and all these different things. Discord has come the closest I feel so far to something that gives us the flexibility to be able to do day-to-day community as well as event-driven community. And so we have, since the beginning of the pandemic, put together a Discord community around just IT and technology. It's not specific to a vendor or VMware or anything like that. It's just a whole bunch of folks. We spend a lot of time talking about streaming setups. We spend a lot of time talking about new cars that people want to buy. Like, it is a true community that's just everybody's focused on some aspect of technology. And we're going to leverage that community to run an entirely parallel community event to VMworld. So VMworld is handling all of the big stuff the way you would expect any big company would. They're going to be live streaming the keynotes. They're going to have 7 different tracks of content, and they're going to be streaming those all day long. It's just the community portion of it kind of gets squeezed out in the middle of all of that.
Totally.
And so we're taking Discord and kind of wrapping it, bear hugging around VMworld. And we are going to have track leads for each of those 7 tracks so that we can do both rebroadcast of the stream, but also the chat and the discussion that kind of goes along with those. And the keynotes. We've got panels set up to do kind of post-game shows after the keynotes to talk about what was important and what new tech was introduced, and maybe put a little bit of a community spin on it. We've got community groups and vendors that are going to be involved so that they can work with or interact with the parts of the community that are important to them. The downside is, me and the 2 guys who set this up and are running with it, we absolutely can't do this alone. So we're probably a week away from, kind of going through and announcing schedules and all of the details around what's going on. We don't want to announce that stuff too far ahead of the conference. What we absolutely need are volunteers. And if you work for me, you've already been volunteered. So Shannon will absolutely, myself and Shannon will both absolutely be big parts of this. But what we really want, and as I am an on-brand employee, we used Microsoft Forms to be able to build it out. What we really want is to know which track or roles you would be interested in. So if you are a customer or a partner or a community member with a VMware background, and you're interested in rebroadcasting streams or managing the schedule for any of these tracks, or even just moderating and participating in the discussion for any of these tracks, we absolutely have a place for you. We've gotten, of the 7 tracks, I think we've gotten 3 of the track lead positions filled at this point, and are definitely looking for more people to volunteer and to bring their expertise into and share it with the rest of the community. So VMworld is going to, yeah, go ahead.
Well, I was going to say, do you have a link I can drop into chat for anybody who might want to just go check it out right now? You'll have to send it to me into our back channel chat, and then I can post it.
Let's do... There's the link to the blog post, and the link for the Discord server is in there as well. But for the people who are too long, didn't read, I will go ahead and throw the Discord link directly into the chat for you too. It's been really fun. I've never been part of building a non-affiliated community from the ground up. It's always been around a specific technology or a specific vendor or a specific event or something like that. This idea of just saying we're IT people, but we have lots of things that we like. And I mean, I do a Lego building live stream 3 times a week, and just grab a drink and hang out with people. And it's been really fun and fascinating to build that. And I'm hoping that we can really leverage that to take the VMworld that we have always loved and really make sure that the community parts of that seem to struggle the most in 2020 with everything going virtual, and bring as much of that back. There will be channels that are filled with just sleeping puppies for everybody who needs to check out and just go veg out with the animals. That we're going to have one track that is all gaming. So we've got a community group who's doing prizes and giveaways for different gaming ladder type tournaments for different things that are going to be in there. Like, we're really trying to be as open and embracing as the physical event would be if it were still going on. We're just kind of making it all up as we go. We've obviously never done this before, and the VMware community has never had to do this before. So we could use as much help from everyone who wants to be involved as possible. So if you're interested, jump into the Discord and certainly ask around, or use the form that's linked in that blog post and let me know what you'd be interested in. Or if you have a completely different idea for something that we could do during the event, I'm all ears. We would love to have everybody involved.
I love this. I've seen that there's a lot of, everybody has to do digital online events these days, and people are getting so creative on how to, you'll never be able to replicate or simulate the hallway track, as they may say.
Yep.
But it's not even the hallway track. It's the, I've learned so much just by standing in the right place at the lunch line. Or met the right person because they were, behind me as we were going through registration, or we were on the same elevator.
You mentioned that. So way back in the day, 2008, 2009, VMware used to do this thing called Birds of a Feather, where basically they were lunch tables that had an expert sitting at them, where there was just a little table tent that said whatever the Birds of a Feather group was. People looking to migrate, or people running in a different configuration, or new to VMware, whatever it was. And it was just a way to not have that awkward, I'm sitting at a table at a conference eating lunch and I don't know anybody here and we don't have anything to talk about. And being able to recreate that, being able to say, here are ad hoc groups that are dedicated to specific topics that we want people to be able to drop in. Tell us about your last migration. Tell us about the biggest disaster that you ran into. Tell us about the coolest tech that you've worked with here in the last 6 months. Tell us something technology-wise that you've gotten to do since the pandemic start that surprised you, whatever it is, but giving these ad hoc little discussion groups that people can jump into, that people can jump out of, that people can jump into and kind of replay to see, what happened in there and be able to glean something from it. I think you're right. We'll never be able to replicate just the proximity, from an auditory standpoint, from a visual standpoint, we'll never be able to replicate that. But what I am convinced of is that community knows how to build community way better than any vendor does. Mm-hmm. And so if we plug into the people who have loved going to these conferences, and not just VMware, but when we talk about Ignite coming up, when we talk about Microsoft conferences, if we tap into the community of people who have absolutely loved attending those and get them to help with building the things that they want to see in there, I promise you get better. Now, I can't replicate renting out an entire amusement park in Discord, not yet. But there's so much stuff I feel like we just have to give it a good try and then take feedback and iterate and figure out what we can do. And this is really our first big step into, is it even possible? And does it survive? Is this a 2020 only thing? One of the things that we saw about Build was normally we would have 7,000 people, mostly from the US, who would show up in Seattle for Build. Right. And we had, 120,000 people from all over at some point I look at that and say, I know, why are we doing in-person conferences?
It sets an interesting precedence because, there's no argument that you can make to me that says meeting people face to face is of no value, or that, right. That even if it's not about the community thing, it's just, I think, when we were on tour and we were hanging out in what they call the expert zone or whatever it was, ask the experts, and people would come up with all kinds of questions, everything from how do I migrate my SQL servers to where can I find the men's room? Yeah. And that was like one of my favorite parts of that whole thing. And it wasn't because, I would say the big reason I was surprised to find that I liked it so much is because most of the time I didn't know the answer. Right. And honestly, that's okay. I think the best thing most people can say when they don't know the answer is, I don't know. And then I follow that up with, but let's go find out together, because we're all learning, and even if you've been in Microsoft, the company, for years, there's only certain things you deal with in your areas of expertise. And I don't, I love the idea of communities.
Azure's big.
Yeah, Azure is real big. And then the people, will come up and ask questions about Excel or something that's, not part of Azure. And
I love Excel.
The parts that, that's a big part I miss, but I love it that communities are finding ways to get creative with things like Discord. I know I'm going to moderate some of the breakout sessions and conversations during DevOps Days Chicago next week on a Discord server. Looking forward to doing that. So it's really cool to see that kind of stuff.
I'd love to see, let's say magically, everything goes back to normal in 2021. Right? Knock on wood. Everything goes back to normal. What about those other 120,000 people that didn't get to come to Build?
Right.
Like, does the online version of Build become a standard deliverable, even if we still do the in-person? Does all of this work that we're doing in Discord become a standard community part of VMworld every year, even when we have the ability to do it in person? Is there some hybrid between the two that allows us to have the best of both worlds? These are all of the things that I don't know the answer to, but that we're trying to figure out, and we're just going to jump in with both feet and see what happens.
And do it together.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, we got about 15 seconds. So Jeremiah, I think we have one more surprise for our audience that you need to take care of.
Let me grab this for you. I'll be right back.
But to the rest of you, let's switch back here. It's been a pleasure hanging out with you and having guests all throughout the week. We'll be doing more episodes next week, and then starting in September, we're going to be switching just to Mondays and Tuesdays. So really looking forward to changing that up. You can find us not only on the Microsoft Developer Twitch channel, but also on Learn TV. So if you go to learn.microsoft.com, you can find out some more information about that, but you can also see the live stream and many more pieces of information here. And here's our last surprise here. So what? Say hello to Jeremiah. I was in the area and decided to just stream from upstairs in my kitchen. So we're going to say goodbye now, and we'll see you all hopefully again real soon. Take care. Bye.